Welcome to Family Watch, your weekly source of information and inspiration on parenting, marriage, and of course, Catholic family life. I am your host, Lennon Ramirez, and with me is my co-host, Manjoe Mendoza.
We hope our discussions here will encourage you as parents to think about your mission and the things that matter most, forming children with conscience and character, faithful to the religious convictions that you taught them, and leading your family to eternal happiness in heaven. Hi, Lennon.
So, yes.
Uh, it's been 1 week. So, what's been happening?
Okay, well, actually, let me talk to you about that. Now, our topic today is about stress, anxiety, and the adolescent. Now, very relevant nowadays. Now, our guest has a bachelor's degree in chemistry and a master of arts degree in education, major in guidance, both from the University of the Philippines. He is a PhD candidate in educational psychology, also at UP Diliman. And he is a recipient of the UP Presidential Scholarship for 2016 to 2017. Now, he has a long list of accomplishments, but Manjo, would you like to continue?
But the most recent ones are, well, he is the international consulting editor of Foundation University Journal of Psychology in Pakistan. He's also consultant for the mentoring program of Universitas Foundation. He's consulted on content for mentoring training modules and processes. He provides orientation on the fundamentals of mentoring and the skills of listening and asking questions. He used to be also the head of the Office of Student Mentoring, Guidance, and Counseling of UANP. Okay, he's the consulting editor. Well, he's the former consulting editor of a magazine called Values Virtues Today by Vibal Publishing. Welcome to Family Watch, Mr. James Lactao. Hi, James.
Yes, Mr. James
Hello.
Lactao. Do I call you Mr. James or James? I am
You can
now.
call me James. Yes, thank
Okay,
you
great.
for this invitation. Thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome. Okay, so I was thinking of how to start this conversation. I can ask how you are, etc. Of course, now you're in Baguio and finishing your dissertation. No, but I guess I wanted to make this a bit personal so that we can get into the root of the causes right now. So, adolescence. No, I apparently finished my adolescent period already, I think. But well,
If
James and I
if
just
not if not, you're in big trouble.
yeah, that's true.
Some
But
people, they stay in that stage for a couple of more years.
so I hope I'm not part of that group. But the thing is, James and I have, we've met each other since I was a small kid pa. So you've seen me grow throughout. And I
Yes.
guess trying to understand, my tendencies and etc. What are the common things that we have to understand about an adolescent?
Okay. So, well, an adolescent is a certain stage in our life, and at least all of us who are here right now, and most probably of our listeners have gone through that stage. And it's a stage wherein, well, let me just put it in a first person basis that we are at a loss in a way, because it's a stage wherein, biologically speaking, our brains and our bodies are still functioning. So even with the biological aspect, there are social aspects, emotional, mental aspects. And we speak of brain development. We have what they call the prefrontal cortex, which is found here behind
Behind.
the brain. And the prefrontal cortex is responsible for higher order thinking skills. And it's also
Ayun,
responsible
any
for,
higher order thinking skills.
so this involves planning, being able to plan things out, to think and know the consequences of one's actions, to be able to think long term, not just immediate term.
It's the level of
uh,
maturity as well, I guess.
it speaks of the maturity of a person, and it also is the prefrontal cortex also is responsible for self-control, trying to if we know that something is not right, we prevent ourselves from doing it. So self-control is very much part of the development of the prefrontal cortex. The problem is our prefrontal cortex is fully developed at age 25. So that's why we can see that adolescents before age 25 have difficulties in those aspects.
Ano bang age
self-control,
bracket pinag-uusapan natin pag sinabing adolescents? Kasi sinerch
adolescent.
ko, pero iba-iba yung numbers na nakikita ko eh. Iba-ibang ages eh.
Yes,
Ano ba talaga?
it actually varies. Some say it's 30 years old, 14. What I think the idea here is when there are certain changes in the body that happens, and then when concerns of one's peers is already very much present, because that's one characteristic of teenagers, is that the opinion of their peers is very much important, even more important than the opinion of their parents. Okay,
Okay.
and that's when they want to be accepted by their peers, and I guess that's why there's really no clear line, but there's a certain range, and I think it's also culturally influenced.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
so that's one. So the development of the prefrontal cortex, but at the same time, the limbic system of the brain is already fully developed. Now, what is limbic system? It is what pushes one to seek out sensations, for one to feel good. For an example of this is, kids would normally do exciting things that are risky in a way, and
Parang
that's
pleasure seeking.
pleasure seeking. Yes, pleasure seeking. And that's the problem, because if you have a fully developed limbic system that seeks pleasure, that seeks
Tama.
excitement, and the prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed, which is supposed to be
Yeah.
responsible for self-control, for thinking, for planning, and there's a problem there. And that's why it's important that parents are aware of this. I suppose, if you have like several kids, you have gone through several of them, and more or less, parents are very much aware of that. I mean, in some cases. So it's good to understand where kids are coming from. Okay, so that's why if we see that, okay, the adolescents are like this, we know that it's not really easy for them, biologically speaking,
Yes.
but it's not a hindrance to teach them. These are actually good opportunities to teach them to do self-control. Even, let's say, the brain is not fully developed for that, but we are human beings. We're capable of learning. Are good opportunities to teach the adolescents self-control and learning the virtues, essentially.
So I guess,
James, ano,
yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead, man.
tatanong sana, ano yung difference kasi ang pamagat ng episode natin? Stress, anxiety, and the adolescent. Parang
Yes.
sa karamihang tao, parang pareho lang yan. Ano ba ang kaibahan ng stress tsaka anxiety?
Okay. So in terms of stress and anxiety, actually what you're saying is that they're essentially the same, except that this is just in broad strokes. No? When you speak of stress, you have a stressor right in front of you. So you feel anxious because of the stressor. But for anxiety, there is the absence of the stressor, but still the person feels stressed in the absence of the stressor. So it's really more of what one thinks.
Ano yung mga stressors ng kabataan ngayon?
One is not being accepted by their peers if they're not good enough. Some of them, their stressors are school, problems at home could be stressors also. If let's say they have friends and they got in conflict with their friends, these are possible stressors. Certain persons, certain events also. So certain life events that could have happened, these are their stressors. So there are various stressors. But for adolescents in general, part of it would be acceptance by their peers, and acceptance by their parents also, by their significant others. So these are essentially, and of course, school requirements. And then if they have organizations, so yeah, these are stressors also that play a big part in their lives.
So, okay. So now, given the definition of stress and anxiety, no? So, ano dapat gawin ng mga bata ngayon? At ano ang role ng parents pagka nasa-stress ang
Okay.
bata nila?
Okay. Well, there are various ways to cope with stress, and actually we have natural ways, diba? When you see people sigh, diba, their shoulders rise. You can take a deep breath and then so when people sigh, that's a natural way to distress, because sometimes when we're stressed, our breathing is shallow. So there is no maximum optimal. There is no optimal exchange of oxygen dioxide in the lungs. That's why slow, deep breathings, these are ways to the stress. And we can do that later. That little exercise of deep breathing. It's very simple.
Sige, turo mo sa amin.
That it can help release of stress. Okay, and then and actually, people during the years that I've been doing stress management, helping kids and even adults cope with stress, I realized that we have our own ways of distressing depending on each personality. It's something that we could try to figure out, but there are a lot of ways where people would distress. Some people, they would fix their rooms, they rearrange the pieces of furniture at home. Some would sing, some would eat. Let me just inject here that there are good ways of coping. There are, I would say, bad ways of coping, because some ways of coping would be like taking drugs also, so which is not healthy. And there are other ways like eating too much also, that could be unhealthy also. There are various ways, but the idea here is that first is to discover what our stressors are. It's good to identify, and then maybe it's also good to figure out the kinds of stress. We have chronic stress and we have acute stress. So when you have chronic stress, these are stress that linger throughout. So there's a duration there. For example, if you go to school and there's a bully there, that could be a kind of chronic stress, because if you encounter that bully every day, it somehow stresses you every day. It might not be like a big kind of stress, but it's a sustained small kind of stress, which in the long run is actually harmful because it could affect our health. Another kind, the other kind of stress that I was talking about is acute stress, which could be like events in our life. For example, we're about to talk in front, to speak in public. That could be a kind of acute stress.
Yes.
Some could be like that kind. It could be stronger, like a death of a loved one, or getting into an accident. This could be a kind of stress that could leave an imprint in us also. Now, it's also good to keep in mind that stress is, it could be a good kind of stress, which they say it's eustress, because this kind of stress prompts us to action. So in a way, we can use stress to help us become better. For example, is let's say in sports, the kind of stress is that, say, you've seen Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant, that they take sometimes the last shot, and that, I suppose, that is very stressful. But they take it as an opportunity to, win the game. And if they see it as that, then that stress is actually going to be beneficial to itself. So we also have what we call acute stress and chronic stress. And the main difference is the duration and the intensity also of the kind of stress. When you speak of chronic stress, these are stressors that are pervasive, or stressors that we see on a daily basis on a prolonged period of time. An example would be, let's say, if there's a bully in school, there's that stress and that fear whenever the bully is there, and we're afraid that the bully might hurt us or might do us some harm, and that's sustained for a couple of days or even years. So that's a kind of stressor. Or being in a bad relationship, that could be a kind of chronic stress. Acute kind of stress is something that happens at a certain point. For example, public speaking. If public speaking is something that's very stressful,
Doc James, ano yan? Yung acute stress is like one-time, big-time stress, ganon?
It could be one.
Tapos na?
Yes, it could be one time, big time. It could be one time, small time. It's something that happens. Yeah. So it's not prolonged. It's not sustained. Okay. Another example of acute stress would be like if someone needs an accident or the death of a loved one. Okay. Yeah. So that's that particular stress. It could drag on. Okay. So because we could have post-traumatic stress disorder also. That's also possible. Now,
paano yung doc, yung kung ako magulang, ano yung dapat kong tingnan sa anak ko para malaman, may indicators ba yan na pwede kong makita?
Okay. Well, in general, stressors are actually good because they help us live with the challenges of every day. But when stressors are too much, there are indications that, like what you've mentioned, some people, their physical manifestations, they feel nervous, their hands sweat, then they have shallow breathing, um, and then it's also possible that if it's too much, they find it difficult to sleep. So there are physical manifestations. Sometimes they feel stress. The chest is somehow what they call paninikip ng dibdib, yan.
Oh.
Or sometimes they manifest themselves in the stomach or at the back, at the nape, ganyan. So there are those physical manifestations, but sometimes they don't manifest themselves.
Paano malalaman kung ang anak mo ay may insomnia o talagang
Okay.
addicted na sa internet, hindi na makatikim?
Okay. Okay. The one for internet addiction, there is such thing now, no, internet addiction. If I guess in general, if they are not able to do what they're supposed to do, then that could be an addiction. If it gets into the way of their normal functioning, daily functioning, then there's something wrong. It could be alarming. Because sleep is very important for the optimum functioning of the brain and of the body. So what can happen is, well, the number of hours spent on playing video game is not too much. Okay, and it doesn't get into the way of one's studies. It doesn't get into the way of one's family life. Kung paano nakikitungo sa magulang o sa mga kapatid. Yan. So if the child is able to do other things, so yeah, those are the things that could be helpful. Now, what I advise my mentees, if they find, first is they have to figure out themselves that there's something wrong. I'm playing video games too much, because it's going to be easier to help them once they realize that there's a problem with that. Pag na-realize nila na, I'm playing video games too much, and what I do is little by little we try to shorten the number of hours, and I tell them to schedule their video gaming. Kasi nga, what happens there is that they might feel deprived of rest, and for them that is rest. So it's okay, you don't need to play video games now, because later you'll have naman 1 hour of video game. If you know that 2 hours is too much for you, then okay, then don't play two hours. And how can that person be helped? Well, you have to inform the other person. So normally kasi may peer pressure din yan. You have other players. You tell them, sabihin mo sa teammate mo, I'm going to play for 1 hour lang because I have to sleep well, because I'm not able to sleep well. So you have to inform the other. That's what I suggest to them. And for some, it really worked. It helped them. And actually, the goal there was not really to play video games. It's actually to regularize their sleep. That was the goal.
So parang, kumbaga, delayed gratification ang nangyayari ngayon, no?
Yes, pwedeng delayed gratification. Yeah, you can use what they call the pre-Mac principle, na you do something and as a reward, then you play video games.
Yes,
Pwedeng ganon. Pwedeng delayed gratification. That's very good,
So okay,
Ano ba?
now that ngayon na nandito na tayo sa topic ng nasabi ng social media, I just would like to, I was reading some kanina, may binabasa akong statistics on how we've been doing social media nowadays. And well, sabi dito, it takes around an average 2.5 hours a day. No? A person would go to social media 2.5 hours a day. And ang sabi niya, ang ganda nga is that from the time na 30 years old ka to perhaps 60 years old, you've already spent 5 years of your life in social media, a total of that. So, nakaka-contribute ba to sa stress tsaka anxiety, given now, na may pandemic na, we're forced to stay at home, mga ganon?
Yes, you're right there, Lennon. Actually, too much social media could contribute to a lot of stress. Too much information can cause us to worry unnecessarily. And that's a big source of stress, actually. In literature even. So other than the removal of control, the pandemic has removed certain controls that we used to have. So that's one thing that causes us stress. Another one is too much information, because we see a lot of bad things also in social media. It could be very tiring. It could be very tiring also. So it was suggested by some researchers to minimize the intake of social media. And of course, we still have to be informed, because it's through social media that we are made aware of certain things. So it's still good to be informed through social media, but not too much to the point that we become too anxious. And I have a couple of mentees who actually refrain or schedule their social media activities.
Right.
Yeah.
Ano pwedeng gawin ng mga kung halimbawa you sense na may konting stress o anxiety sa mga anak mo, meron ba kayong pwedeng gawin na parang common activity para mabawasan yung stress? Kasi parang Pagka,
Yes.
alam mo naman sa pamilya, pag may
Yes.
in-identify ka, isa o dalawang tao lang, parang they feel na, kami lang ba may problema, gano'n.
Yes.
Ano pwedeng gawin ng mga pamilya na
Okay.
parang,
Mhm.
para mabawasan yung stress na yun
Mhm.
without
Mhm.
identifying kung sino yung tina-target nila na anak.
Okay. Okay. Well, what you mentioned, Manjoe, is actually very good if you have a family activity that everyone would probably enjoy, like charades or board games, or maybe watching a movie,
Oo.
things that the family would enjoy, because doing activities with other people actually help that one, rather than doing things on your own. So that sense of being with others is actually helps
Ah,
also. Another thing that I think would be important is to listen. I'm not sure if this is what if this answers your concern, no matter if there's an opportunity just to listen to the kids, that they just pour out their heart. One of the things that I learned is that sometimes these kids, they are not looking for solutions, because I think they already know what they have to do. What they want is someone to read to them. I discovered it in one time that the dad is a friend of mine, and the child just actually wanted the dad to listen to him. It's not just a matter of the dad giving pieces of advice, because that's I think how parents would be. But when me as a teacher also, I wanted to solve the problem immediately,
oo,
so
oo.
giving suggestions, no. But
Oo.
sometimes it's good for them to endure those difficulties, to help them cope with it. It's just a matter of them talking out. That's also
Kumbaga
important.
Ah,
ranting.
Parang ranting, yes.
ranting,
But
ranting.
yes, ranting. It's just to listen, and maybe not even to give pieces of advice, unless probably the child would ask
Asks for
for
it.
it.
Oo.
Oo.
Yes.
Actually, yung trend na nakikita ko rin ngayon na
Yeah.
sometimes people just need someone na makikinig sa kanila because, yeah,
Yes.
exactly what you said, no? Alam na nila kung
Yes.
anong kailangan nilang gawin. It's
Yes.
just more of talking to a mirror now that
And
they
that
need.
is where
Go ahead.
yeah,
Mhm.
that is where many parents, including me, have failed. I mean, kasi ang
Yes.
instinct ng magulang at
Yes.
28 years na akong magulang. So parang
Yes.
tapos ang dami kong anak. So ang instinct, ang knee jerk reaction mo, you
Yes.
dish out the advice. Ito gawin mo, ito gawin mo. Tapos ang
Oo.
Yes. Yes.
problema. Yung ganun.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ang hirap nung yung
Yeah.
sinasabi, ang ganda yung sinasabi mo, James, pero ang hirap gawin. Ang hirap
Yes.
talaga.
Yes.
To learn how to listen, tapos
Yes.
yung be
Yeah.
pathetic.
Yes.
Ang hirap nun. Ang hirap nun.
That's
Yeah.
true. Especially, I think I think as lalaki, we're hardwired to think
Ah,
of solutions pagka may problema eh. Well, that's
That's
what I
right.
got.
That's
No?
right.
Pagka may problema, okay, anong solution agad? No? So,
Yes.
yun yung
Yes.
palagi.
Yes.
So, yes, it is
Yeah.
something that we both have to work on. No? I mean,
Yes.
it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's good. And it's also something that I just learned maybe a year or 2 years ago. It's not directly, I mean, that's the boy is not really directly talking to me. It's just that, given the circumstances, it's something that is, I think, very important. But it's also very hard, as Manjoe said. No, I
Very
give
hard.
modules on listening, so it takes me around 3 hours to conduct it. It's just very simple
Mm-mm.
activity, and one of the activities is just to listen to another for 2 minutes without saying anything. And then in that session, the listener actually finds it very difficult not to talk. So just to listen, and because I think the idea of listening is enabling the focusing on the other person, not on what I can tell the other person. So that's actually important to
That's
listen,
true.
trying to
Yes.
understand what the other person is saying, which is not easy, I guess, also for parents, because as a parent, I guess we want to relieve of any form of pain, from our child. But the thing is, the reality is, pain is actually important. It's through pain that we learn a lot of things, realize that the world is also actually, joyful. This I tell other boys, when we talk about courtship or love, but the extent that you're willing to suffer is actually proportional to the amount of love that you have for a person, diba? So, and that, being able to endure pain is also teaching them how to love, I would say. So,
yeah.
Ganda.
yeah.
Nakakuha ako ng tips dun.
Parang ito, si James, alam mo, parang coach dito ng mga asawang lalaki. Parang,
Yeah,
Pero
because I
yes,
got this.
of course, James is single, but
Yeah,
yung sinasabi mo really applies to us
that's
husbands.
true. That's true.
Ewan ko
I
ewan ko
actually,
kay Lennon. Na-apply
well,
mo na ba,
yes,
Lennon?
no, yes, it's true. Actually, when James was talking about yung program niya, no, I had the opportunity to attend one of those. I remember that it was in Amber, no, with Jeff and other people there. And one
yes, yes,
takeaway I got there is you really put yourselves in the shoes of the other because later on you find yourself you're listening lang. You copy the posture of the person na rin, the gestures that they
yes,
do unconsciously, so
yes.
you kind of become
Yeah, you're
yung
really,
taong pinapakinggan mo, no? So that's
yes,
one
yes.
good thing that. So okay, listening to them, no? What else? Ano pang pwedeng gawin ng, for example, ng parents para sa anak nila na nasa-stress na, for example, with regards to their
Okay,
thesis
okay.
or kung anong ginagawa nila sa economics
Yeah.
or
Yes.
I think nagigets na niya.
Well,
Wala yatang
yeah,
adolescent na nagdi-dissertation sa
Ay,
ngayon na.
okay. Pero yeah, undergoing stress,
Schoolwork,
kumbaga.
schoolwork lang.
Schoolwork,
Sige.
yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah. I guess this is also one of the things that I allow my mentees. So because initially, when I was a new teacher and when I was also a new counselor, I really want to remove all the pain and difficulty of the student or the counselee that I'm talking to. No, but the thing is that we know that human beings are capable of learning and enduring difficulties. And if they're going through certain difficulties, I would say that it's good for them, but I think we have to be there to help them get through it. We allow them to go through their difficulties on their own. I mean, on their own, that they try to solve it, but we're there to assist them, not to solve their problems for them. Because when students encounter certain difficulties and we allow them, because they learn how to cope with that, then they are actually getting better. They become better persons. And I think that's another difficulty that parents would probably find. Uh, yeah, I mean, we know that our children will learn, how to cope with these difficulties. There, maybe accepting that, my kids would find things difficult. I know that's difficult for them, but it's teaching them to grow in virtue. But I'll be there to support them. I'll be there to support them if they need me. But I allow them to walk. I allow them to fall down. But when they fall down, I will ask them, "Do you need my help?" If no, if they want to stand on their own, then we allow them to stand on their own, because it's them wanting to learn and then to stand
Ah,
up on their own feet.
ah.
So,
No, I guess applying that, no, to the pandemic ngayon, no, I have a lot of friends who talk to me sometimes, and usually ang concern nila is may mga away sa pamilya. They've been together for numerous months now since the lockdown, so they're forced to stay with their family. And usually hindi maganda yung mga nangyayari. Minsan nagkakagalitan, nagkakaawayan. So, what do you take? What are your take on that?
yeah, we are in unusual situations right now, and in a way, we're starting to cope. At the start of the pandemic, at the start of the lockdown, the loss. We're blind to what we really have to do, and I think families are starting to cope now, given that it's we're with this pandemic for a couple of months now. And I think what's important is to take care of oneself and to take care of the other. This is usually what I would tell people in terms of stress management, that they have to take care of themselves, and also not to forget that others also, they have their own struggles, they have their own these uh, to fight. So we have to be understanding. Now, these are from what I get from Chain Marie, also about thinking of the others also, which is in psychology, it's something that's very healthy. Thinking of the, they call altruism, of course, helping the others, and there's a lot of literature on good effects of altruism, of genuinely helping the others. So these are essentially
Yeah.
the things that I tell the others in terms of these things. In families, yeah, it's difficult. Yeah, these are difficulties. If we can, like set ourselves from them to focus on our studies, then that would be good. Well, if I can just digress for a bit, speaking of studies, it would be good that there's a designated area for them to study, and this will help isolate them if the stressors are other family members. So I think that's also important to focus on one's studies, because what happens that is, if our mind is preoccupied by the stressors, then we will really get stressed. But if our mind is preoccupied by something else like work or studies, then the stressor will not be there, and we will not feel stressed. And most of the time, it is actually not good to be thinking of the stressors, because if it does not solve the problem, thinking of the stressor or thinking of the problem does not solve it, we should not be thinking about it. Okay, we have what we call the ruminations, negative self-talk. These are things that actually take up a lot of space in our brain that cause stress, when in fact, if you don't think about them, they will not actually cause us any stress. So these are usual thoughts that we have that occupy our mind, that causes us a lot of stress, and it's good to
James?
be able to identify. In fact, no, yes,
Uh, 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 I read something, but it was related to the role of faith and prayer in coping with this,
yes,
with this
yes,
stress and anxiety.
yes,
Maybe we can do.
yes.
You can give us your thoughts on that as a form of closing.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. Actually, nowadays, in this pandemic also, some people discover or rediscovers their life of faith. And prayer actually is a form of communication, a form of connecting. And that's what we want nowadays, connecting. And that's why prayer is a very good way to be helped in a way, because we're connecting, we're talking with God, and with our faith. When we lift up everything to God, then we give God everything, and then try our best to do what we can, and that relieves us also in a way of certain stress, because we allow God to be the one to solve our problem. So of course, when I tell people about prayer, it's not just for the sake of distressing themselves. There has to be a genuine desire to have that relationship with God, and otherwise we're just making use of this. It's just like a mask to feel better. So that's not the case. The primary concern of prayer is to seek God, whether we're in pandemic or not. So that genuine desire, it's a relationship. So to build on that relationship, and some people, because they have more time, they reflect, they can ponder. So prayer comes in, and that's when they realize that they have a need for God, and that's when they try to tighten or to connect again with God. So that's one thing that psychologically speaking, also very healthy.
So I guess if isa-summarize natin lahat, it's really, well, knowing that you're troubled, that there's something wrong, na, and accepting that fact. And at the same time, buhatin mo yung krus mo. Buhatin mo yung krus mo, because it will lead you to a better place, because may matututunan ka dun eh.
Yeah.
At the same time, I guess if you want to talk about it biblically, you'll find your Simon of Cyrene there, which is your parents. Throughout that,
Yes.
Okay, so my favorite part about this is really understanding how the brain works. And this was one of the first topics that we talked about, how our prefrontal cortex is really developing throughout the adolescent period.
Sorry.
And
Sorry, to be correct, the prefrontal
yes.
cortex pala is here. This one is the occipital lobe. This is the
Occipital lobe,
prefrontal, the prefrontal cortex. I have to correct myself. Oh.
Yeah, yun nga. Inisip ko, alam ko occipital din to eh. Pero baka nandun, I don't know the brain that well. Pero okay, anyway. So it's really a process of development. And throughout the adolescent stage, doon natin malalaman yung limitations natin, kung paano tayo I guess, babangon sa kung nasan tayo ngayon. No? Okay. Sige, so Manjoe, would you like to add on?
Yeah, well, ang malinaw sa akin ngayon is dapat imbitahin ulit natin si James kasi yung topic kanina, he just skimmed the surface, no? He talked about resilience, how to teach your kids to be resilient, yung grit, di ba? Yun mga buzzwords ngayon eh kasi I mean, we've seen this generation of wimpy kids eh, parang di ba? Ang tawag nga nila nun sa US, mga snowflake, may konting diferensya, konting problema, nagka-crumble na, gano'n. So I think it deserves one entire episode altogether. So ibitay ka namin, pero hindi, pagpapahingahin ka muna namin para magawa mo yung dissertation mo. Alam mo namin, I mean, sakripisyo talaga na makasama mo kami.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Pero tama, no? Yeah. Go ahead, James.
Can I just add something that's taking from what you've mentioned about, allowing our kids to go through difficulties. Now, it's also good to explain to them why things are difficult. And then
Mm,
the option is, you present them with difficulties, and of course, the parents not to solve the problem for them, but explain to them why is it difficult, what are your options. No, so if we have to go through this difficult, okay, so let's take on this difficulty. I know it's hard, but I'll be here to support you. So to allow the kids also to choose that path also, but also they feel assured that the parents naman will help them if they falter or they find things more difficult. Yeah.
okay. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
James, for
thank you, James.
yes, for being a guest here, no? Okay, so if you've got this
Yes.
far, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, kindly give it a thumbs up rather, sorry. So for comments on how we can improve or suggestions on what topics you'd like us to cover, please type them down to the comment box below, and please know that we always read all of your comments. Till the next video, thank you so much.
Bye.